my name's Andrew Price. I'm the Director of Inspire Management Consulting. My consulting business is about assisting law firms deal with the current change that is happening in the legal market. Do a lot of strategic planning, work with them, and implementation as a result of that. And that's implementation side is really where the sort of need for change management principles arise. So I guess today really what I'd like to talk about is change, basically, what is happening in the market, sort of what firms really need to do to sort of understand all those changes that are happening, and then actually bring them into their firm and make some use out of them, because I think that's where a lot of firms are struggling at the moment. As you know, there's a lot being written and a lot being said about everything that's happening globally in the legal market, which is good, but it's another thing for a firm to actually bring that change in and make it work for them.
Okay, well, perhaps if you could actually tell us what is happening in the market in Australia in terms of change.
Well, I think there's probably no doubt the legal market is changing faster than it ever has, and that change doesn't look like stopping anytime soon. Well, it won't stop. In fact, if anything, the rate of change is likely to increase. So in Australia, we're seeing a lot of changes through the business structures. Same thing happening in the UK, obviously not in the US at the moment. Technology is creating a lot of change, outsourcing, legal project management. There is just a lot going on. There's a number of client pressures at the moment as well, so ongoing rates pressures. It's leading a lot of firms to look at different ways of pricing their legal services. So the list sort of goes on and on. Some firms are dealing with it, others aren't, is my experience.
So if somebody needs your assistance with change, they bring you in. What is it that you do to assist?
So there's two things. So one is assist firms develop their strategic plan, which is incredibly important in the current market. And that strategic plan not be set for any longer than probably 3 years as a result of the amount of change that's currently happening. Now, the strategy itself is probably more challenging in the current market than what it's been in the past, but that's not the difficult part of strategic planning. The difficult part is actually implementing the strategy, and that's where change management principles are involved. So, a firm might go out and spend $1 million on the latest piece of technology, but if they can't implement it, it won't work. And any implementation involves people from needing to change, and that is moving from something they've potentially known for a long time to moving out of their comfort zone and having to deal with something new. And people don't readily want to do that, and it's often resisted. So that's a lot of my work. That's how I assist a lot of firms.
And are you finding that there are more and more firms coming to you because they are struggling with change?
No, I think the more firms are coming to me about strategic planning at the moment, about how to deal with the change in the market. The acceptance of change, how to manage change in the legal market is very slow, particularly compared to other professional service areas. And some are better than others, but I think generally, change management is not it's not commonly sort of understood in the legal market, but certainly in a period at the moment where I think it absolutely needs to be.
Do you think that's because people just underestimate how how much resistance there might be when they actually go to roll out something. So in my experience, yeah, it's always been very difficult for management to get their heads around, why would this be so hard to roll out? Or do you think there's something more to it than that?
I think there's a few things. Lawyers are busy and they want to get back to practicing law, and you might, buy a piece of technology or whatever and sort of bring that into the firm and think that it will, just work, and it doesn't. So I think there's certainly an element of the profession being very busy. There's this whole sort of misunderstanding, I think, though, with implementation of strategy and how change ties into that, because every law firm in Australia, like it or not, is changing every day. That's just how it is, whether it be people or systems or a changing process, whatever, they are constantly changing. It's just that some firms are better than others at managing the change, and I'm finding that it's those firms that are more successful at implementing their strategy and dealing with the changes that they're being faced with in the market today.
Andrew, there are firms and there are firms. We're not all the same. Can you give us an idea of the firms that are being successful in embracing change and those that are not? I don't want you to give me their names, but if you can describe them to me so I can get an understanding of who is doing well and who is not doing well.
I think there are firms that are just not willing to change. There are still a lot of them in the market, and it's the old story, they've been successful for a long time, so why change now? The only really thing I can say to that is, well, that's what hotels thought a couple of years ago. Along comes Airbnb. It's what taxi drivers thought. Along comes Uber. It's what retailers thought. Along comes Alibaba. And in law, it's what a lot of large firms thought, charging $300 an hour for discovery, and now LPOs are doing it for $30 an hour. They also happen to be some of the fastest growing legal businesses in the world. So there needs to be this acceptance that the market is changing, because it is. So I think the firms that are doing better at the moment are the ones that understand that and are prepared to deal with it some way. Most of them are reviewing their strategic plans, and when they do that, it's then taking on the advice of, well, if this is our strategic plan, understanding that an enormous amount of time and effort and resources goes into implementing that, a lot more than ever went into developing the strategic plan. So it's that, the difficult part is this end goal of actually having to implement all this stuff. But I think the firms that sort of understand that and sort of commit to it and allocate some resources to it are the ones I'm seeing that are more successful.
Where do you see the legal profession heading?
I think it's in 10 years' time will be significantly different to today. I often say to firms, if they continue what they've been doing in the last 10 years, they will be lucky if they're around in the next 10. I guess from my end, I travel a bit and see firms overseas that are doing things differently, and a lot of them are very successful. And it's this understanding that a lot of this change is not that difficult. Once you actually see it and understand it and see how firms use it, it's actually not that hard. I think in 10 years, I don't know, but I'm almost sure that it's going to be considerably different to what it is today.
You said that you've been travelling overseas. How do we in New South Wales, Australia, compare with the experiences overseas that you've observed?
Australia is very similar to the UK. And I think the US is being held back by the business structures. So it's still a partnership model that exists there and nothing else. And that makes it very difficult, as opposed to here or in the UK. Australia, I think, is certainly not behind. And in the last 5 years or so, I've been to the US reasonably regularly and sort of come away every trip thinking that there's not really anything going on over there that is not happening here. There's the odd exception with, the very sort of cutting edge technology with AI and other things that is not really being built here. It's sort of more over there. But, I don't really think Australia is behind by any stretch. And in some ways, particularly with business structures, I think we're almost leading the way.
Thank you, Andrew. My name's Elizabeth Espinosa. I just wanted to ask you, if I could, about, you mentioned earlier law firms can spend $1 million on a piece of technology, but unless it's absorbed into the business structure, it doesn't actually solve what they want it to solve. Can I just focus on the concept of lawyers being busy doing legal work? What advice or suggestions can you give to embrace the concept of time spent on the business, on the change, on how business is done, on how the legal services are provided as being valuable?
Well, I think the change element needs to be led. So someone in the firm actually needs to be leading this, and if it's not the managing partner or a general manager or executive in a larger firm, then from a change management point of view, it's likely to fail in any event. So someone needs to be leading it and committed to it and getting partners on side for any change, really to ultimately embed in the firm's culture. So that's probably the first point. In some ways it really depends on what the sort of change is that is happening. But I think it's important for any firm to have a framework around how they are actually going to deal with either the changes, any large-scale change, be it technology or something else, or even the smaller things, because they affect people, and every change affects someone in the firm. So unless they actually manage that, well, it's not likely to be a successful implementation.
And does that change or differ in any way in relation to those lawyers who are practicing in-house, whether it be commercial in-house or government in-house?
Look, it's not. From a change management point of view, not really. But there are certainly. That's one of the sort of main changes that's happening in the market, is this whole sort of push to the rise of in-house teams. What the long-term view of that is, I'm not sure. It could be cyclical. If a CEO comes into a large business in 5 years' time and sees he's employing 150 lawyers, well, potentially that's an area he might cut back on and outsource it. Who knows? But from a change management point of view, I don't really think that there's too much of a difference. With the corporate work that I do, I still see similar sorts of issues. A lot of lawyers still running those teams, particularly around pricing. There's still this sort of tendency to go with what they know, which is a billable hour. It's just that corporates now have got more pressure being applied to them to reduce their legal spend. Many of them have still got as much work or more than they've ever had. So now at that end, they're sort of starting to look at doing things a little bit differently or a little bit more efficiently than arguably what the billable hour is.
Can I ask you about artificial intelligence and where you think that is heading in the context of the legal profession?
I'll be better placed answering this in about 2 weeks. I'm seeing the Riverview's Kim demo in about a week and a half in the US. So, but it's is going to change the market. I think it's very early days at the moment. It's not going to, I mean, you hear stories about, IBM's Watson passing the US bar exam this year. But, Watson or some equivalent of Watson is not going to start taking lawyers' jobs. But it will undoubtedly take some of the more procedural roles away that lawyers are undertaking. So, and the Riverview's Kim is very similar, more from an administrative point of view. So, it's not taking jobs away, but I think ultimately we'll look to make the role of a lawyer, assist a lawyer be more efficient with their processes.